Now that your Snow Studio 2 is assembled and ready, it's time to show you how to use it. We're not having snow yet here in Massachusetts, so I'll be using the fake flake for this demonstration. Once real snow begins to fall, I'll make a new video, so please check back in January. Meanwhile, I'm an expert at snowflake photography, so I'm sure I can get us through this just fine with the artificial snow. Before we begin using the studio, I'd like to talk to you about a couple of things you need to know as a snowflake photographer. First, this kind of photography must obviously be done in cold temperatures. So you'll need a shelter, an outdoor shelter of some kind, that has doors or windows or an opening somewhere to allow it to acclimate to the cold temperatures, and also to shield you from the wind. So I use a porch, an unheated porch, and I leave the windows open. Other suitable shelters can be a garage, a carport, a barn, a shed, a balcony, a covered deck, or even the way back of an SUV or a minivan, as long as there's an opening of a door or a window and a wall to shield you from the wind. The other thing you'll need to know is you need to know something about snow. When snow is falling at higher than 28 degrees Fahrenheit or higher than -2 degrees centigrade, snowflake photography is nearly impossible. The snowflake will simply turn to a puddle on the microscope slide. So I have a saying, wait for 28. That means wait for 28 degrees Fahrenheit or -2 degrees centigrade and colder. And at those temperatures, your snowflake photography will be successful. Alright, once you've got a shelter selected and snow is going to be falling, you need to acclimate your equipment to the cold temperatures. So take everything except your camera outside to your shelter for an hour before the shoot. As for me personally, I leave all of my gear outside all winter long so that it's always ready. The camera is a delicate instrument, so I only take it out for the shoot. I shoot for a half hour, then I bring it back in the house to let it warm up for 15 minutes, and then I bring it back out for a half hour, and back in for 15 minutes. And this cycle is successful for me. In 4 years of shooting snowflakes, I have not had any camera become damaged. Okay, now the next thing we need to do with our equipment is acclimated, the snow is falling, and we go out to the shelter. It's time to set the studio up. So I'm going to select a background and attach it to the back of the goalposts. Then I'm going to do a test shoot to make sure all systems are go. You'll notice on the back of your gray background is one of these fake flakes. And this can be used to do a test shot like we're going to do now, or you can use it to practice. So we'll attach that to the front of the goalposts. Now we'll attach the little big shot lens to the camera. Turn the camera on. A couple of things about your camera settings. You want to be in program mode. If you're in auto, get out of that and go into program mode, because you might want to change your ISO setting and shut your flash off. Also, once you're in program mode, make sure the flash is off. Set your timer. For 2 seconds. And let's do a test shot. Let's zoom a little bit. Focus. And take the shot. Inspect the shot. Looks pretty good. If we had a situation where our test shot was showing us that the scene was too bright or too dark, we would simply go to the exposure value setting. Every camera has one of these, where you can make the scene brighter or darker depending upon the lighting conditions and what you're trying to achieve. I generally start at 1 notch below neutral, and that seems to work well for me. Okay, the camera is set, the test shot is done, everything looks good. I'm going to shut the camera off now and take that gray background slide off there. Now we're ready to get underway for real. We're going to take our black velvet and we're going to bring it outside and we're going to harvest about 25 to 50 snowflakes. We don't want to overload the velvet with hundreds and thousands of snowflakes, because that'll make it difficult to find a pretty one that we want to photograph. So limit it to about 25 to 50 snowflakes. Now it's time to inspect the harvest. So you bring the black velvet back inside and you begin scanning for pretty snowflakes. When you're doing this, be aware that if you breathe in the direction of the snowflake, you could cause the snowflake to melt. So learn how to breathe shallow when you're inspecting, and tilt your head to the side so that you're breathing away from the snowflakes. Okay, so we've inspected the harvest and we found ourselves a very lovely snowflake that we'd like to photograph. Now it's time to transfer it from the velvet onto a microscope slide. So here's our microscope slide. We'll need one of these wooden splints. If I can get this close enough to the camera, something I want to point out. You'll notice that I shaved one side flat so that it can be used like a shovel or a spoon. Now a little bit of magic here. Snowflakes are subject to the process of sublimation. And what that does is that causes the snowflake to cling to the wooden splint and allows us to transfer it to the microscope slide. So when you do this though, hold the splint toward the back because you don't want your fingers too close to where the snowflake is, because again, body warmth could transfer down the splint and onto the snowflake. So generally hold it way back here. Now, the technique for getting a snowflake off of the velvet, with real snow it works great. With this fake flake, I don't know, but this is how you would do it. You simply put the wooden splint under the flake, just slide it under the flake, and then gradually lift up very slowly, and the flake will actually stick to the, of course the fake flake won't, I'm going to help it along. The flake will stick to the splint. It's like magic. In fact, in some cases, when you put the splint down on the velvet, you'll see the snowflake jump onto the splint. It's really amazing to watch that. So removing a snowflake from the velvet is a very simple matter. Just put the splint underneath, the tip of the splint underneath the snowflake, slide it a little bit, and then slowly lift it up, and the snowflake comes with the splint. Now, what do we do with that snowflake once we've got it on the splint? Well, we bring it over to the microscope slide, and notice how I hold the microscope slide by the edges. Again, do not put your fingers anywhere in the middle of the slide because your body warmth could cause the slide to warm up and melt the flake. Also, don't breathe in the direction of the flake. Tilt your head to the side and breathe shallow. To deposit the snowflake onto the microscope slide is also a very simple process. You have the flake facing up, you bring it down, and you just spin the splint, and the snowflake will fall onto the microscope slide. If not, you want the snowflake in the middle, so if necessary, once it's on the slide, you can manipulate it, you can rotate it, you can move it, and put it generally somewhere in the middle of the slide. You're all set. Your snowflake has been transferred successfully from the velvet to the microscope slide. And now, a little bit more magic. The process of sublimation, which causes the snowflake to cling to the wooden splint, also causes the snowflake to cling to the microscope slide. Once your snowflake is on the slide, you'll be able to tip it upright and even upside down, and the snowflake will not move. In 99% of the time. We'll get into those exceptions later. Once you've got the snowflake positioned, attach it to your goalposts. It's now ready to have its portrait taken. Now we go back to the camera. We turn our camera on, and we should have all our settings should be saved, but just check them again. You should be in program mode. Your exposure value from your test shot should be set. Now, ISO. Let's talk about ISO. The best thing to do is to use the lowest ISO possible for the smoothest picture. So try ISO 100, and if you have lower, try that. Because after all, your camera will be stabilized and you might be able to get away with it. And again, we want to make sure that our timer is set to 2 seconds. Now, little big shot macro lens is still on the camera. We'll need our pneumatic leveler. Now we're going to zoom and go for the shot. We're going to put the leveler under the camera. Now notice how this flake is a little bit high in the frame. What we can do is we can remove the slide and adjust it until the snowflake is right in the middle. There we go. Let's adjust the focus Press to shoot. Check that focus again. Take our hands off the camera, and 2 seconds later, there you have it. Perfect snowflake macro. Let's do that again. Let's go over these instructions again. Once you transfer the snowflake from the velvet to the microscope slide and position it here on the stand, on the goal posts, check your camera settings, make sure you're in program mode, correct EV, try the lowest ISO possible, and make sure your timer is set to 2 seconds. Set your zoom level. Add your pneumatic leveler. Fine-tune your focus. Press to shoot. Remove your hands from the camera, and voila, there you go. And that's it. That's how you shoot snowflakes with Snow Studio 2. Now, there's a couple of things I want to talk about which go beyond this. One of them is cleanup. When you're done with a snowflake, you want to hold the slide by the edges and use the brush to knock that snowflake off, because your fingers obviously will warm up the slide and then the next snowflake will melt. So knock it off there with the brush. That's what the brush is for. Another thing I want to talk about is the cover plate. In your kit, you're going to notice that you've got a slide that has adhesive strips on both sides. This is a cover slide. Every once in a while, 1% of the time, your snowflake will have some kind of a nodule which makes it difficult for it to stick to the slide. When that happens, you use the cover slide. You just slap the cover slide on. And notice how the cover slide is offset a little bit. The reason for that is to make it easier to separate these two plates when you're done. So don't line up the cover plate exactly with the microscope slide. Have it a little bit offset and a little bit higher. So with the cover plate on, obviously, then you just throw it up there and take your shot. And because you had offset it, removing the cover plate is a very simple matter. That's what the cover plate is for. Now I also want to talk about surface lighting and backlighting. When you're doing snowflake photography, if you have a light coming onto the surface of the snowflake, you either have sunlight or you have a lamp like I'm using here, which is striking the surface of the plate. If you have light coming from the back, the snowflake looks entirely different. And you may want to do some backlit snowflake work. In that case, you simply remove your background, and now you can do backlighting. Aim the studio toward a window, or take your light source if you're shooting at night and put it behind. You can use colored filters, translucent filters, and experiment with all kinds of things. And that's it. That's how you use Snow Studio 2. That's all you need to know in order to enjoy snowflake photography. Remember to check back in January for the new video using real snow. If you have questions or need help, send me an email or visit me at the Facebook Snowflake group. Links to both are below this video. Thank you for your time.